Millionaire's shocking birthday surprise for Waitress. Welcome to Alcott Stories, where every tale touches the soul and every moment leaves a mark. Today's story will make you believe in second chances, silent heroes, and love that grows in the most unexpected places. What happens when a millionaire secretly changes a struggling waitress's life, only to find his own? Heart-changing along the way? Stay with us, because this birthday surprise is more than just a gift. It's the beginning of a love story no one saw coming. Don't forget to like, subscribe, and turn on the bell, because you don't want to miss what happens next. The cafe was alive with the low hum of conversation and the soft rustle of expensive coats brushing against leather chairs, where wine glasses sparkled beneath golden chandeliers, and the scent of roasted espresso beans lingered in the air like a quiet lullaby. Maya moved through it all like poetry in motion, her elegant braids swaying gently with each step, her almond-toned skin catching the flicker of candlelight, her deep brown eyes alert yet soft, masking the exhaustion pressing against her bones. She wore the same black apron she had worn every night this week, but never let it dim the dignity in her posture or the grace in her voice. With practiced precision, she cleared empty dishes from one table and smiled warmly at a young couple on their anniversary, even as the blisters in her shoes silently screamed. No one noticed the weight she carried behind that smile, except him. Ethan Cole, seated in his usual corner near the window, watched her with a gaze that held no arrogance, only quiet intrigue. Dressed in a tailored navy coat and silver cufflinks, his blue eyes scanned not just her movements, but her essence, the way she adjusted the collar of her co-worker's shirt without being asked, how she crouched to pick up a dropped spoon for a child with a shy smile, how she scribbled orders with the speed of someone used to racing against time. Maya, to him, was more than a server. She was a storm in stillness, a woman who wore resilience like a second skin. He noticed that she never once checked her phone, never once rushed, never once let the weight of her double shift bend her spirit. Ethan had wealth, influence, and everything money could buy, but watching Maya made him feel the one thing he rarely did: curiosity. Who was this woman who seemed invisible to the rich patrons around her, but radiated light, stronger than the chandeliers above? He watched her rub her neck for just a second, before quickly straightening as if afraid. The gesture showed too much humanity. She offered refills with soft-spoken kindness, always remembering who took cream, who preferred lemon, who was allergic to nuts. Ethan admired how she remembered things most people didn't think mattered. She didn't flirt. She didn't flatter. She served. She noticed others, but never seemed to believe anyone truly noticed her. But Ethan did. He noticed how her hands trembled slightly when she thought no one was looking. He noticed the faint purple under her eyes, carefully covered with makeup. He noticed how her smile dimmed for just a second, when a child called her just a waitress. He noticed her quietly folding a $5 tip with reverence, tucking it carefully into her back pocket like it meant something, because to her, it did. He noticed how she never sat, how her knees were red from crouching, her back subtly hunched from carrying trays twice her size. Yet she still offered laughter to lonely guests, still remembered the name of the old man who always sat alone on Wednesdays. Ethan had seen beautiful women before, glamorous and polished, but Maya glowed with something deeper. She had a fire that burned silently, and even though her role was to serve, she held herself like someone who knew her worth, even if the world didn't yet recognize it. He watched her lean down to comfort a crying toddler, while the mother scrolled through her phone, watched her write, "Have a great day," at the bottom of the check like she genuinely meant it. There was strength in the softness of her voice, resilience in the way she pushed through fatigue without complaint. She was a mystery wrapped in warmth. And each night, Ethan sat at his corner table pretending to read emails. He found himself more drawn in by her rhythm than any stock update or quarterly report. He began to memorize the cadence of her walk, the musical note in her laugh when a customer made a joke, The way she thanked even the rudest guests with sincerity. He didn't know her story yet, but he felt it. Buried in her eyes was a novel worth reading. Tonight she didn't notice his gaze. She was too busy wiping a spilled drink and apologizing for something that wasn't her fault. But he watched. Every move with a reverence usually reserved for paintings and poetry. It wasn't lust, it was recognition. Recognition of someone who deserved more than tips and tray balances. Someone whose light had been dimmed but not extinguished. Maya moved to the next table, her head held high, unaware that across the room, a man was quietly planning to rewrite the story she'd grown used to living. This wasn't just another shift, not anymore. Maya had no idea her world was being watched by eyes that saw deeper than most. Eyes that weren't just admiring her work ethic, but trying to understand the cracks beneath her calm. Behind that apron and worn-out smile lived a woman who once dreamed in color. Before grief stole her father and responsibility became her shadow, she wanted to heal broken children. She used to read books about trauma therapy late into the night, scribbling notes and highlighting paragraphs, imagining herself sitting across from kids who felt forgotten and telling them they mattered. But life rewrote her story without asking for permission. Her father's sudden passing left a silence in their home that echoed through every unpaid bill and sleepless night. Her mother's health collapsed next, and with it, their fragile sense of stability. College tuition was exchanged for grocery lists, books for bills. Her once vibrant dreams faded. Quietly behind the clang of dishes and the constant ticking of the restaurant clock, Ethan, ever the quiet observer, had once casually asked the cafe manager about her, not out of nosiness, but because her presence stirred something unfamiliar in him, concern. When he heard that Maya had taken on extra shifts without ever asking for more pay, that she stayed behind to help close, even when she wasn't scheduled, and that she once offered to cover a co-worker's rent with her own tip money, his respect deepened into admiration. She wasn't just hard-working. She was selfless. It was rare to find someone so weighed down by life, yet so unwilling to let bitterness harden them. Ethan began visiting more often, always around the same time, always sitting at the same corner table, always watching with discretion. He noticed she never spoke of herself, that she asked questions but never offered her own stories in return. She hid behind politeness like it was armor. Her laugh was genuine but short, like she didn't believe she had time to enjoy it. Her eyes, those deep, expressive eyes, sometimes betrayed a heaviness her smile tried to conceal. He began to wonder how someone could be so full of life and yet so accustomed to being invisible. She was a mystery wrapped in grace, and it became impossible for him to ignore the pull she had on him. He never tried to flirt, never invaded her space, just sat and listened with his eyes. There was power in silence, and Ethan used his to learn her rhythm. He watched her draw a tiny sun on the coffee lid of a sad-looking teenager, saw her gently braid a little girl's loose hair while the mother typed away on her phone. He saw her kindness, not as acts of service, but as instinct, like compassion was her native language. Each of those quiet moments carved a place in his mind, and something he'd long buried beneath. Corporate deals and hollow parties began to stir. He started asking himself questions he hadn't considered in years. Why do some people carry so much while others watch from a distance? Why did she remind him of the version of himself before the money, the fame, the expectations? And why did he feel like he owed her something? Though she'd never asked him for a thing, Maya was the kind of woman who would give her last warmth to someone else in the cold, who would carry burdens for people who didn't know her name. Ethan found himself lingering longer after meals, pretending to check emails while stealing glances at her as she cleaned counters, always the last to leave. He wasn't sure what he was feeling. Guilt, attraction, inspiration. Maybe all three tangled into one confusing knot. But what he did know was that he wanted to ease her weight, even if just for a moment. She had dreams once, and he couldn't stand that they'd been buried by tragedy. He found himself scrolling late into the night through scholarship programs and online psychology courses, wondering what it would take to lift someone from survival back into purpose. He wasn't planning to swoop in like some fairy tale savior. No, that wasn't what Maya needed. She didn't need to be saved. She needed to be seen, empowered, given the tools to rebuild what life had stolen. And slowly, the idea took form, a plan that would change her trajectory without robbing her dignity. A gift with no strings, just a door she could choose to walk through. He began taking notes, talking to people, quietly pulling strings, while she served strangers and wore herself thin to keep her mother's medication stocked and her little brother's tuition paid. Ethan began sketching out a second chance. Not for romance, not for recognition, but for the rare kind of woman who gave the world everything while asking nothing in return. And though Maya wiped down another table, unaware of the plans orbiting just outside her reality, something in the air felt different. She looked toward the window where he sat, found his eyes for a fleeting second, then quickly looked away. She didn't know it yet, but the seeds of something beautiful were already being planted right there behind that stained apron and her quietly abandoned dream. Maya's fingers trembled slightly as she slipped her phone back into her apron pocket, the screen flashing. A final message from her landlord. That rent was 3 days overdue. It wasn't the first time. She'd memorized the cold tone of those reminders, each one another brick in the wall, slowly closing in on her peace. Behind the counter she exhaled silently, her chest tightening as she mentally calculated what little she had left after paying for her mother's medication, groceries, and her younger brother's school books. There was no room for her in that budget, no room for dreams, birthdays, or even breath. And yet, with a quiet inhale and a forced smile, she turned back to her tables as though her world wasn't slowly unraveling behind her ribs. What choice did she have? She couldn't let the cracks show. People expected warmth, service, cheer, not pain. So she gave it, every laugh, every thank you, every "can I get you anything else?" Like a woman trying to stay afloat with grace in a sea determined to drown her. Ethan, sitting in his usual spot by the window, heard only fragments of her whispered conversation to her co-worker in the back. "Birthday, nah. Skipping it again. Maybe next year," she said, shrugging like it didn't matter, though her voice betrayed something far more tender, resignation maybe, or the kind of sadness that comes when hope stops bothering to visit. That sentence hit Ethan like a gut punch. He stared at the untouched coffee in front of him, the steam curling into the air like the dreams he'd once let go of too. He remembered. God, how he remembered. Nights sleeping in his car, hoping no one would knock on the window, sharing instant noodles with a stray cat that had become his only companion. The shame of pretending he had it all together while silently praying. Something anything would give. The day that changed everything for him hadn't come with confetti. It came in the form of a stranger who saw past his appearance and offered him a chance, a mentor who said, "You're more than what the world sees." That moment carved a new path, one built on opportunity and belief. And now, sitting in a luxurious cafe with the weight of a fortune in his name, Ethan realized he had the power to be that moment for someone else. For her, Maya reminded him of who he used to be before the suits, the private jet rides, the boardroom applause. She had the same fire, the same grit, the same relentless smile that tried to hide the ache of needing more and pretending to be okay with less. As he watched her gently clear a table, taking care not to wake the sleeping toddler in his mother's lap, Ethan saw more than just a woman burdened by struggle. He saw a quiet warrior, someone who showed up even when life tried to shut her down. He noticed how she laughed when customers cracked jokes, even when her mind was likely somewhere else, fighting deadlines and due dates. He watched as she counted her tips at the end, of the shift with the reverence of someone who knew every dollar meant food or fuel or medicine. not luxury. He admired how she never once asked for pity, never hinted at complaint, never made her problems anyone else's. But it broke something inside him to know that someone so deserving, so full of light, felt unworthy of celebrating her own existence. Skipping her birthday wasn't about saving money. It was about believing she didn't matter enough to pause and be celebrated. And Ethan couldn't accept that. Not anymore. The urge to act wasn't just kindness. It was a responsibility he felt down to his bones, a call to repay the grace he once received by planting it in someone else's garden. He watched her help a new hire tie their apron, offering encouraging words while hiding the storm inside her own heart. That's who she was, always giving, always folding her needs neatly beneath the needs of others. Ethan leaned back, one hand resting on the table, his mind racing with thoughts of how to lift the weight she carried, without making her feel small or indebted. He knew enough about pride and pain to understand the delicate line between help and humiliation. This wasn't about saving her, it was about reminding her that she still deserved to dream, to rest, to be loved without cost. Maya, meanwhile, remained unaware of the thoughts unraveling just a few feet away. She wiped down another table, humming quietly to herself, unaware that the man by the window wasn't just sipping coffee. He was watching a miracle move through the room in sneakers and stress, and quietly plotting a way to give that miracle her wings back. When Ethan didn't show up the next morning, Maya told herself it meant nothing. Customers came and went, and she had no right to feel anything at all about a man whose name she barely knew. Still, each time the cafe door chimed, her heart jumped a little before settling back into its usual rhythm of silent endurance. By the third day she stopped looking. She pushed thoughts of him aside like unpaid bills, always present, always delayed. Meanwhile, Ethan had vanished into a different world entirely, one where connections moved quickly and dreams were quietly carved into reality. He sat in his penthouse office, floor-to-ceiling windows overlooking the city, but all he could see in his mind was her, braids dancing behind her, eyes filled with storms she never voiced. "I don't want to just hand her money," he told his assistant as he paced, the usual confidence in his voice now tinged with purpose. "I want to hand her power, a door. She can walk through it or not, but it has to be hers." He made calls, dozens of them, to scholarship boards, community colleges, therapy networks, even a professor he once donated to, everyone who could help craft a bridge for someone stuck in survival mode. When the first yes came, he didn't smile. He exhaled, like part of the weight had lifted from his own shoulders too. Then came the second yes and the third. He quietly paid a year's rent to her landlord through a discreet holding company, ensuring there'd be no eviction notices to wake her in the middle of the night. He bought her a sleek new laptop, preloaded it with a full accredited child therapy course she could complete on her own time. But it wasn't enough to simply open doors. He wanted her to know someone believed in her so fiercely. They were willing to invest in her unseen future. So he composed a handwritten letter, the ink trembling slightly as if even he felt the gravity of what he was doing. In it, he didn't write about charity. He wrote about potential. He wrote about resilience. He wrote about the quiet light she gave to others, even when her own flame flickered. He wrote that he wasn't saving her. He was simply giving her back what life had tried to steal. Then he signed it without adding his name, only his initials, wanting her to feel ownership over the moment without the shadows of gratitude or obligation. Lastly, he opened a small black velvet box and slid the folded check inside. It wasn't just a check, it was a map back to her dreams, drawn in ink and intention. He held it for a moment, staring at the weight it carried, not in dollars, but in dignity. He remembered how lost he once felt, how the smallest gesture from someone who saw his worth turned everything around. Now it was his turn. The irony wasn't lost on him. The billionaire planning a secret gift for a woman who didn't even know he was more than a regular customer with kind eyes. His team asked if he wanted press. He didn't. This wasn't for headlines or Instagram reels. This was personal, sacred, a silent act for a woman who made the world brighter with nothing but worn-out shoes and warm hands. He didn't want to be the hero in her story. He just wanted to be the hand she never saw coming, reaching out in the dark. When everything was in place, laptop boxed, letter sealed, rent paid, course unlocked, or check hidden in velvet, he paused and stared at the assembled pieces. None of them glittered, none of them screamed luxury. But together, they whispered something she hadn't heard in a long time. You matter. You're seen. You're allowed to dream again. Ethan didn't return to the cafe just yet. He wanted the plan to unfold with precision, with care. Timing mattered. Her birthday was approaching, and he knew she'd expect nothing. That was exactly what made the surprise powerful. It wasn't just about money. It was about timing, intention, and trust. And though he didn't know how she'd react, he hoped that when she opened the box, she wouldn't see a handout, but a mirror reflecting the brilliance she'd forgotten she had. The secret was ready. The moment was near. And back at the cafe, as Maya scrubbed tables and told herself stories to stay numb, she had no idea the world was about to shift beneath her feet, not from tragedy, but from a quiet act of love disguised as generosity. The morning sun rose like any other, casting soft golden rays across the cafe's windows, but to Maya, it was just another date on the calendar she had long stopped celebrating. Her birthday, once a source of joy and homemade cakes, had become just another shift to survive. Another day to push through quietly without balloons, candles, or even a whisper of acknowledgement. She tied her apron as always, checked the specials board, and dove into her routine with muscle memory guiding her every move. No one mentioned the date. No cards, no flowers. Not that she expected any. Still, a part of her, small, fragile, buried, ached. That aching part nearly forgot how to breathe when the door chimed, and in walked Ethan. But not as she remembered. This time he looked almost unreal, dressed in a royal blue tailored suit that hugged his frame with quiet elegance. His medium-long black hair swept back with intention, and those piercing blue eyes scanning the room for only her. Conversations dulled. Cups paused mid-air. The air thickened with quiet anticipation. Maya, standing behind the counter wiping a tray, looked up just as he stepped forward with purpose. Her hands stilled. "Excuse me," Ethan said, his voice calm but steady, slicing through the silence like a violin note. "Can I steal a moment of your time?" It wasn't a request, it was an offering. She blinked, unsure if this was real, unsure what moment she was walking into. Slowly, nervously, she approached him. The world seemed to shrink, voices melting into background noise, leaving only the soft clink of his footsteps and her heartbeat, pounding like a drum in her ears. Ethan reached into his inner jacket pocket and pulled out a small black box, elegant, simple, and somehow heavy with mystery. Her fingers trembled as she took it, every eye in the cafe now quietly, trained on the moment but wrapped in reverent silence. She opened it. Inside, nestled in velvet, was a folded check. Her breath hitched. She unfolded it, her eyes scanning the number once, then twice. Her knees buckled slightly, not from greed or disbelief, but from the sheer emotional weight of being seen, of someone valuing her existence with such staggering clarity. It wasn't just the money, it was the recognition, the thunderous affirmation that she mattered. Then she noticed the envelope beneath the check. She opened it slowly, her fingers brushing against the handwritten letter inside. To the woman who served the world while setting her own. "Dreams aside, it's time for your turn." Her lips parted, but no words came. Only tears, slow, trembling, unstoppable, falling like rain in a summer storm. Her vision blurred, her shoulders began to shake, and for a moment she forgot where she was. She forgot about the rent, the pain, the sacrifices. She forgot how to pretend. She was just a girl again, holding something that felt like magic in her hands. "Why me?" she whispered, barely audible, the question falling from her lips like the final piece of a burden she'd carried too long. Ethan stepped closer, his gaze unwavering. "Because you never stop being kind," he said, as if it were the most obvious answer in the world. Not because of pity, not because of charity, but because she had earned this moment with every selfless act, every long night, every quiet prayer. Applause didn't erupt. There were no camera flashes, just a sacred stillness as Maya slowly lowered her head, clutching the letter to her chest like it was the first real gift she'd ever received. Somewhere deep inside her, a door unlocked, not the one that led to wealth, but the one that led to possibility. People around her smiled softly, some wiping away tears of their own. But Maya only saw Ethan, the man who had noticed the invisible parts of her, the man who remembered what she had forgotten about herself. He didn't ask for anything in return. He didn't stay to explain. He didn't announce who he was or what he had done. He just reached out and gently touched her arm, grounding her as emotions swelled like a wave inside her. In that moment, Maya didn't feel like a waitress. She didn't feel like someone struggling to survive. She felt chosen, seen, held together by the hope that maybe life hadn't given up on her after all. As Ethan turned to leave, she stood still, frozen in the quiet awe of what had just happened, her chest rising with a different kind of breath, one that didn't carry dread, but light. For the first time in years, the weight she carried didn't feel like it belonged to her anymore. As the cafe's glass door closed behind Ethan, Maya stood motionless, her fingertips still trembling from holding the check and the letter that had unspooled years of silent suffering in one breathtaking moment. But even before her tears had fully dried, the world around her began to ripple. A customer had captured a discreet photo, her stunned expression, the small velvet box in her hand, Ethan walking away with quiet grace, and within hours, the internet had done what it does best. The image spread like wildfire. Headlines spun romantic tales and fairy tale. Engel's millionaire surprises. Waitress with life-changing birthday gift. Kindness still exists. Real-life Cinderella moment in downtown cafe. Maya hadn't even processed it all when strangers began flooding her inbox with messages, some full of love, some laced with envy, others asking for her secret. But Ethan said little, offered no interviews, gave no press statements. When someone from a popular talk show called his office, he politely declined and simply said, "She deserved it. That's all." And it was true. To him, this wasn't newsworthy. It was necessary. Meanwhile, Maya made the boldest move of her life. She gave her notice. With a lump in her throat and shaky hands, she thanked her manager for the opportunity, hugged a few co-workers, and stepped out into the sun, not as someone walking away from work, but as someone walking toward herself. The laptop he gifted her became more than a device. It became a lifeline. Each day she sat at her mother's bedside, typing lectures, answering quizzes, and scribbling notes into margins like she used to in her high school days. Only now with new purpose. Her mother, slowly recovering, watched her daughter with renewed pride. Her little brother, once shy about asking for help with homework, now bragged, "My sister's going to be a child therapist." And Maya, she didn't just study, she bloomed. The glow in her eyes returned, her posture shifted, and laughter, real laughter, escaped her lips more freely. Ethan never hovered, but he was always near, checking in without crowding, encouraging without pressure. He'd invite her to quiet coffee dates or museum walks, where conversations stretched far beyond trauma and textbooks and wandered into stories, jokes, shared memories. They didn't define what they were. There were no labels, no declarations, just a closeness that settled like warmth between them. Months passed. Then came the day Maya clicked submit on her final course project. Alone in her room she cried, not because she was done, but because for the first time she had finished something for herself. Not for survival, not for duty, but for her dream. She ordered a cheap cap and gown online, stood barefoot in her backyard, with her brother holding the phone, and posed for a photo that captured more than a milestone. It captured a reclamation. And standing beside her in that picture, wearing a soft smile and casual clothes, was Ethan, not as the millionaire, not as the mysterious man from the cafe, but as someone who had quietly become part of her new beginning. Their shoulders touched, their hands didn't, but the closeness was louder than any kiss. She posted the photo with a simple caption, "We rise when someone believes." The post went viral within hours, but Maya didn't check the numbers. She spent the evening in a quiet corner of the city, sitting beside Ethan on a park bench, watching the sky change colors as he asked, "How do you feel?" She turned to him, eyes soft, heart full. "Free," she whispered. They weren't official. There were no promises, no big speeches, just two people sitting beside each other, knowing something beautiful had begun. Not in the headline moment, but in every quiet act that followed. The world had called him a hero, but she knew the truth. He was a mirror, reflecting back to her the light she had almost forgotten she carried. And now the story was still unfolding, not in grand gestures or perfect endings, but in the simple, tender rhythm of two hearts learning how to beat in sync. The rain had started softly that evening, tapping gently against the windows of the cafe, like a memory coming home. Maya stood outside for a moment beneath her umbrella, watching the droplets blur the golden glow of the place that had once held her pain, her exhaustion, her quiet hope. 1 year ago she'd been inside, hiding her birthday beneath a forced smile and tired hands. Tonight she stepped through the doors, not as a waitress, but as a woman transformed, her steps lighter, her eyes steadier, her heart fuller. The scent of fresh coffee greeted her like an old friend, but everything felt different now, familiar but no longer burdened. She scanned the room and saw him, Ethan, sitting at the same corner table, the one where everything had quietly begun. He looked up the moment she entered, his blue eyes softening in a way only she could bring out. Gone was the man who once wore tailored suits like armor. Tonight he wore comfort, dark jeans, a sweater, and the kind of ease that only comes from knowing you're exactly where you're meant to be. Maya approached him slowly, her heels clicking gently on the tile, and when she reached him, she didn't speak right away. She just reached into her bag and pulled out a small white envelope, sliding it across the table with a shy, knowing smile. Ethan raised an eyebrow, curious, but didn't open it yet. "You gave me more than a check," she said softly, her voice steady but tender. "You gave me love disguised as kindness. You saw me before I even knew how to see myself again." Ethan's heart stirred in his chest, not with surprise, but with a depth of emotion he hadn't expected to rise so fast. He opened the envelope and unfolded the paper inside. It wasn't a letter. It was a drawing, simple, done in pencil, rough around the edges. Two figures sat on a bench facing away, watching the rain fall in silver streaks. No names, no words, but he knew instantly. It was them, a quiet moment immortalized in art. Maya watched his eyes take it in, and when he looked back up at her, the gratitude on his face wasn't just for the gift. It was for the journey that had brought them here. "Happy birthday," she said, a playful smile tugging at her lips, "to the man who made mine unforgettable." He laughed then, that rich, full sound she'd come to adore, and she took the seat across from him, not as an employee, not as someone needing help, but as an equal, as someone who had risen beside him. Around them life continued, waiters moved, steam curled from mugs, conversations hummed softly, but in their little world, time paused. Ethan reached across the table and took her hand, his thumb tracing slow circles on her skin. "Do you remember?" he whispered. "When I said I didn't want to just give you money, I wanted to give you a future." She nodded. "You gave me both. But you also gave me something I never asked for, something I didn't think I deserved." He tilted his head. "What's that?" Her smile was quiet but radiant, a reason to believe in love again. For a moment neither of them spoke. They just looked at each other like people who had weathered storms together. Not always hand in hand, but always heart to heart. There had never been a dramatic confession. No grand kiss under fireworks, just steady steps. Trust built brick by brick, and a bond that grew in silence and honesty. It was a love story not born in luxury, but in quiet rooms and thoughtful gestures. A love that didn't demand attention but earned it anyway. Outside, the rain continued to fall, washing the city clean, and inside that small cafe, something sacred settled between them. Maya leaned forward, her forehead nearly touching his, and in a whisper only he could hear, she said, "I used to serve tables. Now I serve purpose. And you served me love when I was starving for it." Ethan felt the truth of it in his bones. He cupped her face gently, not needing to kiss her, not needing to rush. What they had didn't need spectacle. It was already extraordinary. As the night wore on, they remained there, two souls once drifting in separate storms, now anchored in each other. And though the world outside kept spinning, the story between the millionaire and the waitress had reached a place far beyond its fairy tale beginning. It had found its truth, not in rescue, but in recognition. Not in riches, but in quiet, enduring love. A love that had started with a tip of kindness and became a legacy of the heart.